he's talking about there's more footage. There's 140 hours that he has. And each episode was only maybe an hour, I think. There was 4 episodes, so there's at least 130 something more hours that he hasn't edited or, produced.
For some reason, Diddy, around the time of his arrest, thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be exonerated later, so I'm going to film all this, and then I can use it in my big comeback later when I'm not in jail. Didn't work out the way he thought, and it turns out he went to jail for a few years. All right, he didn't get the full amount, but he still got a few years. And 50 Cent somehow managed to pay for the footage off of the videographer. Probably Diddy's worst nightmare, this. It's got to be up there. Now, we're going to get into what's in the actual documentary, and fucking hell, it's something. But
Was there anything that surprised you from that footage?
The footage, well, I mean, I think it's rare to find someone who's being, talked about all over the country. All eyes were on him, so to speak. And it was really interesting to see his last days of freedom, and what was sort of important to him. Obviously, there's phone calls with his attorneys, with his team. It was very interesting to watch a man who's known for his brand presence. He has a really amazing knack for marketing and all of that, and how he was sort of taking that into account and how he was coming off to the public, in the days leading up to his arrest and indictment.
I got like 3 or 4 pictures in the documentary that I've seen of myself. Some people say they saw more, but I know three different times where I was certain places and you could actually see me in the documentary, and that's the only.
When Netflix released The Reckoning centered on Sean Diddy Combs, a lot of people felt the same thing almost immediately. The allegations were serious. The tone was dark. The timeline was already disturbing. But even with all of that, something still felt missing. Not facts exactly, not accusations either. What felt absent were the raw, uncomfortable moments that make a story feel fully exposed instead of carefully presented. The documentary had weight, but it also felt shaped, controlled. Edited in a way that suggested viewers were seeing something real, but not necessarily everything that was available to be seen. And that is exactly where the whispers began. Because once people started hearing that the production team may have had access to far more footage than what made it into the final release, the conversation changed. This was no longer just about what the documentary showed. It became about what it left out, and that possibility matters because the missing material was not described as random archive footage or leftover B-roll. According to people familiar with the situation, some of it was filmed right before Diddy's 2024 arrest, when pressure was peaking and his public image was beginning to collapse in real time. That means the unseen material may not simply add detail. It may completely change the emotional temperature of the story. What makes that even more striking is who was positioned around this project. On one side, you have 50 Cent, a longtime rival who has never hidden his hostility toward Diddy and who clearly understands how to turn scandal into a powerful media event. On the other side, you have Gene Deal, someone who wasn't just watching from the outside, but spent years in Diddy's orbit and continues to insist that what the public has seen so far is only a fraction of what exists. That combination alone is enough to make people pay attention. Then, the legal tension deepened things further. Netflix says the material used was obtained lawfully. Diddy's side argues private content was taken without proper consent. Meanwhile, 50 keeps hinting that far more exists than what was shown, and Gene Deal keeps backing that up. Once all of those pieces are on the table, one question naturally takes over the entire story. What exactly was left out? And more importantly, why was it left out?
Reason, Diddy, around the time of his arrest, thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be exonerated later, so I'm going to film all this, and then I can use it in my big comeback later when I'm not in jail. Didn't work out the way he thought, and it turns out he went to jail for a few years. All right, he didn't get the full amount, but he still got a few years. And 50 Cent somehow managed to pay for the footage off of the videographer. Probably Diddy's worst nightmare, this. It's got to be up there. Now, we're going to get into what's in the actual documentary, and fucking hell, it's something. But let's quickly take a look at 50 50 Cent's press tour where he looks like a kid at Christmas right now. I've never seen a man this happy when it wasn't on like the day his kid was born.
How did you get that footage of Diddy?
I figured most journalists would not disclose their sources.
50 Cent's a journalist now, is he? He's ruthless.
Does he know y'all have this in the doc?
I would doubt he knows.
Oh, God, he's bad to the bone, isn't he? What 50 Cent is doing right now is basically a lesson to us all, right? Maybe we're just not hating enough on the people who are shit to us. And the documentary starts out with Diddy panicking about his public reputation just days before he was due to get arrested. On the phone to his lawyer, trying to come up with strategy.
We need the core theme to be, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong on any front.
By the way, these conversations, the lawyer had no idea he was recording them. So when the lawyer's like, yeah, we need everyone to believe you did nothing wrong, it kind of takes away from when the lawyer is out in public saying, yeah, my client is completely innocent. And now he's showing the behind the scenes where he clearly didn't think he was very innocent. So not Diddy's smartest move. However, throughout this journey, you'll see he makes a lot of crazy decisions.
I don't think it's working. I listened. I've been a superb client, as you said. I jumped on the plane. I'm coming to New York, but I'm just running around waiting for a shoe to drop.
He's shitting himself right now, in case you can't tell, and he really doesn't look good.
It's the middle of September, and there's still no indictment.
Bro, then you have to have a spokesman. You have to have some sort of comms to constantly be pushing that, Mark. Because you may just be a person that you just may watch CNN. You know what I'm saying? And there's 9 billion people in the world, and 7 billion of them is on Instagram and TikTok.
He's basically trying to get control of the narrative. That's what he's really worried about. He wants public perception to be, this was all bullshit. Unfortunately for him, we had all seen the CCTV of him beating the shit out of Cassie. So we know you're not a good guy, man. That's out there. A statement from your solicitor is really not going to change that.
We have to find somebody that'll work with us, whether they're from this country or from another country. It could be somebody that has dealt in the dirtiest dirty business of media and propaganda.
We need to brainwash some motherfuckers right now, and we need people who are used to working with the dirtiest of dirty, because that's what he is, and he's admitting it. How could you let this footage fall into the hands of 50 Cent, my guy? And honestly, it always comes down to money with Diddy, because Diddy didn't get rich just because he was, clever in music. Diddy got rich because he robbed people all the time. And him not taking care of the people around him, it just comes back to bite him a million times over.
It's like we have a movie, you're speaking this language, and you know what I'm saying, we need subtitles. We're not providing the audience with subtitles. And I invited you to this movie, and you in this thing, you don't know what's going on. You just see, you just see the images, quickly. Now it has a whole life of its own.
I gotta say, this whole doc was edited well when he said you just see the pictures and they cut to the CCTV. Well done, 50. You nailed that, son. If you're going to take him down in style. So you get a clear window from the jump here into Diddy's psyche. He doesn't give a fuck about Cassie or any of these girls. He doesn't give a fuck about anyone. It's save yourself mentality, and it's crisis mode. And you can see on his face, he's got a drug problem. This is at an all-time high of his drug taking, surely, because he is stressed a fuck.
The footage people keep talking about centers on Diddy's final days before his September 2024 arrest. And that detail is important because it changes how everything in those clips is interpreted. This was not a man casually documenting his life. This was not someone filming content with no idea what might be coming next. According to the way this material is being described, Diddy appeared to know pressure was closing in from multiple directions. And instead of moving like someone relaxed or unaware, he seems to have been moving like someone trying to actively manage the story before the story swallowed him. That is what makes the behind-the-scenes material so unsettling. One of the most discussed moments reportedly places him in a hotel room speaking to his attorney on speakerphone. His tone stays controlled, but the content of the conversation points somewhere much more revealing. There are references to losing, to messaging, to the need for the public to believe he did nothing wrong, and to a strategy that appears to move beyond legal defense into full narrative management. That distinction matters. Because once someone is not only fighting a case, but also obsessing over how the public sees the case, you are no longer just watching legal preparation. You are watching reputation preservation in real time. And the more those scenes are described, the more the issue stops being just what he said. It becomes when he said it. These were not post-conviction reflections. These were not polished interviews. These were not carefully staged public denials. This was before the arrest, before the courtroom, before the final collapse had fully happened. That means the footage appears to capture a moment when Diddy still believed control might be possible, but was beginning to realize that money, status, and influence may no longer be enough to stabilize the situation. And once you understand that, it becomes much harder to believe the documentary told the whole story. Because if even a portion of that material was strong enough to produce this much reaction, then the unseen portion naturally becomes more interesting than the released one. It suggests there may be additional scenes showing not just defense strategy, but psychological unraveling, fear, panic, and a much more direct look at how image management operates when a powerful figure realizes the walls are closing in. That is exactly why his legal team reacted so strongly. They argue those were private conversations. Netflix and 50 see something else. And sitting between those two positions is a very uncomfortable possibility that the most revealing material may be the material the public still hasn't fully seen.
50, how'd you get it, and what does that scene show?
Well, I mean, you know, you're a journalist, Harvey. Harvey, you would not disclose your sources.
We usually don't.
Yeah, but I got it. Yeah.
What he said.
And what do you think it conveys? Because we see someone trying to pull the strings and talking about, he would say affecting, others would say manipulating the public views of the allegations.
I think that, you know, one big theme of the series is to go behind the scenes to really understand how brilliant you could say Sean Combs is at marketing, at owning his narrative, controlling the narrative at all times. And so why would that stop, you know, when his life is on the line? So I think that, you know, on its face, that's what it is. But as you get deeper in the film, you start to realize, you know, perhaps how some of these tactics, you know, how they really came to present themselves, you know, during the trial.
You show that, his abilities, his early rise. Alexandra, you also give time to victims of the alleged abuse. Some of the cases are in different procedural postures. And you show victims who were women and men. Why is that important?
Because, you know, victims of sexual assault, sexual violence, you know, that should, there should be, gender should not be a part of that conversation. When you are a victim, you are a victim. And I think that, you know, this series was a platform in a way for these alleged victims.
One of the biggest questions hanging over all of this is how the footage ever slipped out of Diddy's control in the first place. Because reports suggest that he had been filming himself extensively as part of a personal project of his own. The idea, at least as it has been described, was that this material could later help shape his version of events, protect his image, and maybe even support a redemption narrative if he came out of the legal process with enough room to rebuild. But plans like that only work if the people around you remain loyal, paid, and aligned. And that is apparently where things began to break down. What seems to have happened, at least according to multiple people discussing it, is that agreements were left unresolved, payments stalled, trust started collapsing, and once that happened, the footage itself stopped being private documentation and started becoming leverage. That is a major shift, because once trust disappears in environments built on secrecy, anything that was once protective can become dangerous very quickly. That is why the alleged involvement of videographers matters so much. If the people holding the material no longer felt secure, no longer felt compensated, or no longer felt protected, then footage that was meant to serve Diddy's interests could suddenly serve someone else's. And that is precisely where 50 Cent's production world is believed to have entered the picture. 50 hasn't laid out the full chain directly, but he also hasn't exactly discouraged the idea that he has seen more than the public has. Instead, he's done what he usually does: hinted, joked, implied, and allowed curiosity to keep building. And that approach matters because it turns the existence of unseen footage into a kind of psychological pressure campaign all on its own. Even without releasing everything, he can keep public attention locked on the idea that there is more material out there, more context, more private moments, more narrative that still hasn't surfaced. And once that happens, control changes hands. That may be the most important part of the whole story. Because a man who once managed rooms, relationships, perception, and access at the highest level is now in a position where someone else may be holding the footage that defines his most vulnerable moments. That is why the unreleased material feels so powerful, not only because of what it may show, but because it symbolizes a complete loss of control.
And that's what it was about. So that's why you don't see a cameo other than the pictures they used of me on the film in the documentary. I got like 3 or 4 pictures in the documentary that I've seen of myself. You know, some people say they saw more, but I know three different times where I was certain places and you could actually see me in the documentary, and that's the only thing you're gonna get. But the stories that they told in the documentary, bruh, come on. They could have went a whole lot deeper. They could have did a whole lot more. So I ain't in the documentary because that lady that was the director, I think, what's her name? Alex, well, you know, Alex Staple. You know her name, Mighty? Yo, Mighty, just give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna look this up, all right? Okay. Her name is Alex Stapleton. The director that I spoke to was Alex Stapleton. She was the one who told me that she was the director, she was the producer, whatever, this, that, and the third, the whole 9 yards. And she was talking mad greasy to me. And listen here, it's no matter, after you talk that kind of talk to me, it's no amount of money she could have paid me anyway for me to get in there. You know, my story is more too valuable, you know, getting in the depth or getting in depth with this whole stuff. And it would have helped that documentary a whole lot. You know what I'm saying? In actually, they used all the stuff that I told them and did it the way that I was saying do it. Tim Dog started off with the childhood with Puff and the whole 9 yards. Kirk Burrows do the business part, but they was trying to put people in there like Mark Curry and other people to talk about the streets or what was going on, you know, a certain thing. But Mark can only say so much, you know what I'm saying, because he was an artist, you know, so he wasn't with Puff like I was with him during that time when we was running back and forth here and there and the whole 9 yards. So, you know, Miss Alex Stapleton is the one reason why I'm not in the documentary, but it's all right with me. I've been in a lot of documentaries. I did The Shine, I did the A&E, I did the Discovery Channel, I did the Fox. You know, I've been in a whole lot of different documentaries, and I'm always on the Art of Dialogue. So the people been getting most of the information from here anyway.
Yeah, man, you always on here, man. Always got to bring you on. So, with that being said, man, I want to get right into the documentary, man. How you feel about the documentary, man? The behind the scenes footage they got of Diddy leading up to him getting arrested, and how you feel about all that, man?
Well, what I feel about the documentary, they left a whole lot of key things out. If they was going to do something and they're going to say in the reckoning of Sean Combs, the reckoning, or Diddy, the reckoning and stuff like that, it should have been a lot of people that we lost because of him. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't only Big, it wasn't only Tupac, you understand? For the atmosphere that he put those kids in. You got a guy named Anthony Wolf Jones, who was from Bad Boy, from its conception as doing security and being one of the financiers of Puff having to have some money to keep Big and Craig Mack around before he got to Clyde Davis. You know what I'm saying? They wasn't able to tell that story because they didn't have no intel on that story or what went down, or they didn't do their investigations right.
Gene Deal's role in this conversation adds a different kind of pressure because he is not speaking like a casual observer or a late arriving commentator. He is speaking as someone who insists he already understands the ecosystem from the inside. And one of the most consistent things he keeps saying is simple. Around Diddy, cameras were never unusual. According to Gene, recording was routine. Meetings were recorded. Events were documented. Moments that felt private often were not. In his telling, this was not about memory. It was about control. That idea matters because it changes how the public interprets the existence of unreleased footage. If cameras were always part of the environment, then the existence of more material is not shocking on its own. What becomes shocking is the possibility that the footage now exists outside the hands of the person who expected it to protect him. Gene seems almost unsurprised by that possibility. If anything, he sounds like someone who always believed this kind of outcome was inevitable once enough trust broke down. And that is what makes his comments hit differently. He is not merely saying there could be more footage. He is saying the documentary itself may have been conservative, that it left out key people, key stories, key context, and key losses tied to the atmosphere Diddy allegedly created around him. In other words, what the public saw may not have been the full reckoning. It may only have been the version that could be defended, packaged, and released without expanding into even riskier territory. That creates a strange tension, because on one hand, the documentary was already explosive enough to drive public reaction, legal tension, and nonstop commentary. But on the other hand, according to Gene, it still stopped short. It still left major stories untouched. It still failed to include voices that could have pushed the whole thing further and made the overall picture darker, wider, and more connected than the audience realizes. If that is true, then the documentary did not end the story. It only opened the door. And Gene's presence keeps reinforcing that idea. The public is not looking at the whole structure yet, only the portion that was selected, assembled, and made ready for release. That is exactly why the unreleased material keeps hanging over everything like a shadow.
Everybody want to say that 50 Cent did the whole documentary. He was responsible for doing the whole documentary, what goes in there and what goes out of there. No, I don't believe that. And I don't believe that he's responsible for everything that goes in there. I don't believe he's responsible for everything that goes out of there. Guys want to say that he's snitching, you know what I'm saying, because he's telling his truth about what went down and what he saw or what he heard or whatever like that. I don't know how to love my enemy. And if I gotta put out the truth about something that he was doing and is wrong, and that was wrong, I don't have no problem with that, 50. Not a problem at all. Keep doing it. Maybe enough men come out and speak out on some bull stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they're saying that Diddy's family is preparing $1 billion lawsuit over this documentary.
I think they dropped it already. I don't think they ain't gonna have a chance, because before you put something out like that, they're gonna dot their I's and cross their T's. They're gonna make sure everything is in place. And if Puff had friends over there at Netflix, if it haven't came down, but it's showing yet. If it haven't came down yet, they ain't got a leg to stand on.
Yeah, you just made me think of something. I'm sure Netflix has 1 million lawyers, and I'm sure they had plenty of lawyers go over this thing to make sure it was airtight.
Yes, sir.
And they might probably even cut some stuff out that maybe they weren't even sure about. Just probably, man. Well, Gene, I appreciate you taking the time. Dope content as always. And I wish you luck, man. I know, man. You get on these interviews and they go crazy, man.
Yeah, man. Listen, a lot of people want to, come at me, and everybody want to find fault in 50, find fault in me, find fault in anybody who's speaking out against the evil shit that's been going on. But what about find fault from the person who did it?
Gene Deal's argument carries weight for one reason above all others. He is not talking like someone who thinks the documentary was the final word. He is talking like someone who thinks it was carefully selected, heavily managed, and still incomplete. And that matters because Gene is not pushing a simple claim that more exists in a vacuum. He ties that claim to a much bigger point about how Diddy's world allegedly operated. According to him, the cameras never stopped because documentation itself was part of the structure. It was part protection, part leverage, part proof of power. And once you accept that premise, the idea that there is still more material out there stops sounding speculative and starts sounding almost inevitable. That also helps explain why the reactions around the documentary have been so tense. Because the problem is no longer limited to what was shown. The problem is that what was shown may be enough to convince people that much more could still exist. And once the public believes that, silence becomes suspicious, legal statements start feeling strategic, and the absence of full release becomes almost as provocative as a release itself. Gene's comments about Netflix also add another layer. He seems to believe the platform would have had to vet everything very carefully, and that if certain footage survived that process and still made it into the final documentary, then it likely passed through a serious legal filter first. But at the same time, he also hints that some things may have been cut out, precisely because they were too uncertain, too risky, or too difficult to lock down fully. That creates the exact gap speculation thrives on. Because if the public starts to believe the released material was only the safest version of the story, then the imagination naturally moves toward what the unsafe version might contain. That is where the fear around unreleased footage gets stronger. It is not only about what is on camera, it is about what kind of story emerges when people conclude that the real documentary may be bigger than the one they watched. And Gene's broader frustration speaks to something else too. He keeps asking why so much energy goes into attacking the people speaking out rather than the person at the center of the allegations. That is not a small point. It reflects the way whistleblowing, public testimony, and insider criticism often get reframed as betrayal, while the underlying conduct gets pushed to the side. In that sense, the documentary is no longer just media. It becomes a test of where blame gets placed when a powerful image starts collapsing.
Walt was telling me on his way here, I didn't see this, but apparently there's another 100 hours of Diddy footage on the cutting room floor?
So Diddy is still doing press. I mean, Diddy. 50.
Diddy is not doing press.
No, he's
doing press on the yard.
He's doing press, like he's doing push-ups. No, 50 is still doing press, and obviously with the success of the Reckoning documentary, he's talking about there's more footage. There's 140 hours that he has, and each episode was only maybe an hour, I think. Mm-hmm. There was 4 episodes, so there's at least 130 something more hours that he hasn't edited or produced. And he's saying that he may put it out on YouTube, just to put it out there,
like on his 50 Cent Devo page.
I don't know if it'll be on his page, but he just said, he doesn't know if he's going to release it with Netflix or through Netflix. He might just, put it out on YouTube or wherever, some other platform. But the one thing that he said that was interesting is, he said, because you see people out here trying to, say, oh, the documentary can paint a narrative, this, and the third. And his words were, if you see the rest of this footage, there will be no more, kind of like, oh, you can paint this narrative. It's pretty clear cut, the things that are being said in the documentary, the things that he still can't believe Puff, because he says that a lot, like he can't believe Puff actually recorded all of this.
Yeah. But
what makes the idea of unreleased footage so dangerous is not only what it could reveal about Diddy himself. It is what it suggests about the wider culture that allowed someone in his position to document his world this extensively in the first place. Because if one powerful figure was doing this, then the obvious question becomes, how many others were? In elite circles, cameras are not always about memory. Sometimes they are about pressure, about leverage, about making sure everyone in the room understands that moments can be preserved, revisited, and used later if necessary. That changes how people behave. It changes what they say. And even when people do not fully understand why they are being recorded, they often feel the power dynamic anyway. That is why the existence of more footage matters beyond this one case. If the unseen material really includes private legal conversations, emotional breaking points, manipulations of public narrative, and footage of a powerful man trying to manage collapse in real time, then it is no longer just personal evidence. It becomes a window into how elite power actually behaves under pressure, not in polished press statements, not in public denials, not in carefully staged interviews, but in raw moments where the image breaks. That is what makes these situations provoke such aggressive legal and reputational defense, because once private footage escapes, it does not simply threaten one scandal. It threatens the entire system, built on the assumption that powerful people can control what the public ultimately gets to see. And if 50 really has access to enough material to remove any doubt about how the documented behavior should be interpreted, then the incomplete nature of the documentary almost becomes part of the suspense itself. It tells the audience that the file is not closed, only partially opened. And that is a much more disturbing idea than a completed story, because it means the most revealing material may still be waiting.
Two-part question I want to ask you. How you feel about the documentary on Diddy? And you and 50, what's going on between both y'all? Me personally, the documentary was incredible, man. You know, shout out to 50, man. But I know you and 50, y'all got something going on, right?
Indeed, indeed. So originally, when I heard about the reckoning of Sean Diddy Combs' documentary that was produced by 50 Cent, I wasn't going to watch it. And I wasn't going to watch it because, quite frankly, I had grown a little tired of the Diddy case. You know, I had followed it, I had studied it, I had researched it. And at this point, the man was sentenced to 50 months in jail, I believe the time was that the feds gave him. There really wasn't much left to talk about. Everything had already been put out there, all the hours of testimony, hundreds of hours of court proceedings. It was nothing else to talk about as far as I was concerned. And then people kept texting me. They said, Dr. Umar, you got to see this, you got to see this, you got to see this. So one night, I can't go to sleep, and I decided to go ahead and watch it, and I watched all the episodes. I will say that it appeared to be very well researched from the point of view that 50 Cent wanted to portray. I don't think it was balanced in that you didn't hear anything positive at all about the man, when in fact, despite the horrendous deeds, which cannot be excused at all.
50 Cent and Gene Deal didn't just draw attention to the footage. They challenged a much deeper assumption, the idea that power can always keep things quiet. Netflix revealed part of the story, but not all of it, and people can feel that. In some ways, that may be the most unsettling part of the entire situation. Not only what was already shown, but what might still be out there. Footage still sealed, still unreleased, still capable of changing the emotional meaning of everything the audience thinks it already understands. Because once the public believes there is more, the center of gravity shifts. What is visible stops feeling complete. What is missing starts feeling more important than what was aired. And that leaves the real question hanging over everything. Not whether additional footage exists, but whether, if it ever fully surfaces, it will merely confirm what people already suspect or expose something much more serious than the public is prepared for. That is why this story does not feel finished. It feels paused. And in a case built on image, influence, and control, sometimes a pause is more dangerous than a conclusion.